Imagine this. The entire kingdom of Egypt bows before one man, the Pharaoh. His word is law, his presence is divine, and his household is a fortress of privilege and danger. Yet within that gilded palace lies another hierarchy, hidden from public view, the royal harem. Among the hundreds of women who lived there, one figure stood above all, the Pharaoh's favorite concubine. To be chosen for this role was not merely about beauty, it was about survival, influence, and navigating one of the most perilous courts in human history. Tonight, you are stepping into that world, not as a queen, not as a servant, but as the Pharaoh's most prized possession. And what you'll discover is that being the favorite was both intoxicating and terrifying. A life of silk and gold balanced on a knife's edge. But before we dive deeper into this hidden world, let me pause to ask you something. Where are you listening from tonight? Is it late at night, early morning, or maybe the quiet middle of the day? I'd love to know. Share it in the comments. I always read them. And if you truly enjoy learning about history's darkest, most fascinating secrets, don't forget to subscribe and join us here. That way, you'll never miss another story like this one. Now, let's return to Egypt, to the shadowed chambers of power, where the Pharaoh's favorite concubine ruled an empire within an empire. The harem was not merely a place of leisure, it was a political institution. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs maintained vast harems, filled with wives, daughters of nobles, and foreign princesses sent as part of diplomatic marriages. But among them were concubines, women selected for their beauty, charm, and talent, often gifted by allies or chosen from within Egypt itself. The favorite concubine was no ordinary figure. She lived closer to the pharaoh than many queens, held the power to whisper into his ear, and could sway decisions that shaped the kingdom. Her quarters were richly furnished, guarded by eunuchs and female attendants, but also isolated. She lived in luxury, yet every glance, every word, was weighed by rivals, servants, and officials waiting for a chance to undermine her. Daily life as the favorite concubine was a strange balance of indulgence and vigilance. You would wake in chambers perfumed with incense, adorned in linens finer than most Egyptians ever touched. Your body would be bathed in oils, your hair braided with gold threads, your eyes painted with kohl to enhance their allure. Musicians and poets might be summoned to entertain you, dancers performed in your honor, and trays of delicacies were brought at your command. Yet beneath this display of luxury lay a relentless competition. Every woman in the harem, from low-ranking attendants to foreign princesses, watched your every move. They studied how often the pharaoh visited you, how much favor he showed you, what gifts he bestowed. To be the favorite was to live under constant surveillance, envied by many, despised by more. Still, your influence extended far beyond silk sheets and golden cups. Pharaohs were often swayed in matters of state by those closest to them. A favorite concubine could whisper a name, recommend an official, or plead for mercy, and the ruler might listen. Some of Egypt's great political shifts were whispered into being by women hidden in the harem. Foreign ambassadors knew this. Some even sent bribes disguised as gifts, hoping the favorite would speak on their behalf. But influence was as dangerous as it was powerful. If you appeared too ambitious, too political, rivals would whisper that you were manipulating the divine king. And in Egypt, to be accused of undermining the pharaoh was to invite ruin, exile from the harem at best, execution at worst. Even within the palace, survival was not guaranteed. Food could be poisoned, attendants could be bribed, and rivals could fabricate rumors of treason or infidelity. To be Pharaoh's favorite was to walk on glass, adored in public, but constantly threatened in private. The favorite's attendants were her first line of defense. Every gift was tested, every visitor scrutinized, and every rumor tracked. But even the most loyal servant could falter under pressure. One careless word might reach the wrong ears, and in the dangerous web of palace politics, that could be enough to end everything. In a place where beauty was currency, your very life depended on remaining in favor, avoiding scandal, and outmaneuvering rivals who longed to take your place. And yet, there was another side to this role, one that history seldom mentions. While queens were bound by ceremony and politics, the favorite concubine could wield a kind of freedom within her captivity. She did not carry the burden of royal legitimacy. Her children, if she bore them, might never inherit the throne, but they could still rise to positions of immense power. Some concubines became mothers of influential princes, shaping Egypt's future through bloodlines that history records only faintly. Others became patrons of the arts, using their wealth and influence to sponsor musicians, architects, and religious cults. In these ways, the favorite left marks on Egypt that outlasted her beauty, rippling through culture and politics long after she was gone. But perhaps the greatest paradox of being the favorite concubine was this: you were both untouchable and disposable. As long as you held Pharaoh's eye, you were elevated above all others, more powerful, in some ways, than queens. But pharaohs were gods on earth, and their desires shifted like the Nile. A new beauty could arrive tomorrow. A foreign princess might catch his eye, or political needs could demand a change in favor. One moment you were the jewel of Egypt, and the next you could be cast aside, forgotten in the shadows of the harem, or locked away in isolation. To be the favorite was not a destiny. It was a gamble, one you had to win every single day. And so, the question must be asked: was being Pharaoh's favorite concubine a blessing or a curse? History tells us it was both. A life of unimaginable luxury balanced against endless fear. A position of immense influence shadowed by the constant threat of downfall. It was a role few women could survive for long, and fewer still could turn into lasting power. But in those shadowed chambers, where the whispers of concubines shaped the fate of a kingdom, survival was its own kind of victory. To understand the weight carried by the pharaoh's favorite concubine, you must first step into the architecture of the royal harem itself. It was not a single room, nor even a single building, but a complex of chambers, gardens, and guarded corridors that formed a world apart from the rest of Egypt. High walls enclosed it. Soldiers patrolled its perimeters, and eunuchs monitored every entry point. To the outside world, it was a mysterious sanctuary, whispered about but rarely seen. Inside, it was a society of women, each competing for recognition, each fighting for survival. Queens, secondary wives, noblewomen, musicians, dancers, and servants all coexisted in this gilded cage. At its center sat you, the chosen favorite. Your quarters were larger, decorated with fine frescoes and imported ivory. But you were still a prisoner of privilege, unable to leave without the pharaoh's permission. Comfort and captivity existed side by side. Daily rituals in the harem reinforced this blend of luxury and control. The morning began with attendants bathing you in scented water, oils rubbed into your skin until it glistened, and perfumes drawn from lotus, myrrh, and cinnamon. You were dressed in linen so sheer it seemed woven from air, adorned with necklaces of lapis, lazuli, carnelian, and gold. Meals were brought from the palace kitchens: roasted duck, honeyed bread, figs, and beer. To an outsider, it was a paradise. But every ritual served a purpose beyond indulgence. You were being prepared not just to please, but to impress. Each appearance before the pharaoh was a performance. Every detail, the tilt of your eyeliner, the arrangement of your jewelry, the way you spoke, could determine whether you maintained your hold on his attention or slipped into the background. Beauty was not optional, it was survival. The harem was also a school of influence. And as the favorite, you became its most visible student. You were expected to master the arts of music, dance, and poetry, not simply as entertainment, but as tools of persuasion. When Pharaoh entered your chambers, you had to offer more than physical beauty. You had to captivate his mind. Songs might carry hidden meanings, stories might echo current political struggles, and dancers could reflect loyalty or defiance in coded movements. In this way, the concubine's role went beyond pleasure. She became a living mirror, reflecting Pharaoh's greatness back to him while quietly shaping the mood of the palace. This subtle dance of power required constant vigilance, because every rival was ready to seize the stage if you faltered. Jealousy in the harem was not a petty matter. It was a deadly one. Other women watched your rise with sharp eyes, waiting for any slip that could be exploited. Rumors could be crafted like weapons, whispered into the ears of eunuchs, scribes, or minor officials until they reached Pharaoh himself. She has grown arrogant, one rival might say. She plots to influence politics, another could accuse. And in a court where perception was as important as reality, such rumors could destroy you. To combat this, favorites often cultivated alliances. Gifts were given to servants, small favors extended to other concubines, and promises whispered in corridors. You learned that loyalty in the harem was bought not once but daily, renewed with generosity and vigilance. Without it, you were a solitary figure surrounded by enemies. Despite these dangers, the favorite concubine held immense influence. When Pharaoh lounged beside you, wine in hand and guards dismissed, your voice could become the most powerful in Egypt. Perhaps you pleaded for the promotion of a loyal official, or suggested leniency for a disgraced noble. Perhaps you subtly echoed the concerns of powerful priesthoods, or reinforced Pharaoh's divine image with words of devotion. History records instances where concubines became the hidden engines of policy, their suggestions shaping military campaigns, temple donations, and even succession disputes. But this influence came with razor-thin limits. Push too far, and you risked being accused of manipulation. Show too much ambition, and Pharaoh himself might turn cold, suspicious of your motives. The art was to remain indispensable while appearing selfless, to act as though your only concern was Pharaoh's glory, even when your survival depended on steering him. The physical dangers within the harem were just as real as the political ones. Poison was a weapon whispered about often, though rarely confirmed. Food tasters became essential, as did trusted attendants who tested perfumes and oils before they touched your skin. Accidents could happen, a faint during a banquet, an illness after a feast. But in the world of the harem, no accident was ever fully trusted. Rival concubines had their own allies among guards and servants, and the palace was a maze where loyalty was never absolute. Your survival required paranoia, but also calm composure. Show fear, and you appeared weak. Show suspicion, and you risked angering Pharaoh. You had to walk the thin line between vigilance and serenity, always appearing radiant while calculating every danger. And yet, beneath this glittering cage of politics and fear, there was still the raw human element, emotion. Pharaoh's favorite concubine was not only a role of influence, but also of intimacy. The pharaoh was treated as divine by the people, but in private, he was still a man. He laughed, confided, and grew vulnerable in moments that only you witnessed. These glimpses of humanity could deepen your bond, offering rare comfort in a world of constant performance. But they could also make the role more dangerous. To know the pharaoh too well was to hold secrets no one else shared, secrets that, if ever revealed, could end your life. And so, even affection became a double-edged sword, binding you closer to power while sharpening the risks you faced. The paradox of being the favorite was never clearer than in this. You were both the most desired and the most replaceable. For now, the pharaoh's gaze lingered on you, elevating you above all others. But Egypt's court was vast, and rivals were unrelenting. At any moment, a new concubine could arrive, younger, fresher, more exotic, perhaps a foreign princess offered in alliance, or a noble woman whose beauty stunned even hardened courtiers. When that moment came, your place as favorite could vanish overnight. The silks and perfumes, the gifts and influence could be swept away, leaving you isolated in the very palace where you once reigned. To remain the favorite required constant reinvention, an endless performance, and the ability to anticipate Pharaoh's shifting desires before he himself recognized them. And so, as night fell over the palace, with torches flickering in the corridors and musicians playing soft hymns, you lay in chambers perfumed with lotus and incense. Outside, the Nile flowed as it always had, carrying barges of grain and gold. Beyond the palace walls, Egypt worshipped Pharaoh as a god. But within these walls, in the shadowed chambers of the harem, you knew the truth. To be the favorite concubine was not a gift of fate, it was a test. Every day was survival, every night a gamble, every breath a reminder that your power could vanish as quickly as it came. And tomorrow, the game would begin all over again. The role of Pharaoh's favorite concubine cannot be understood without exploring the broader world of Egyptian belief. In the eyes of the people, Pharaoh was not simply a king, he was divine, a living god, the son of Ra, the earthly embodiment of Horus. To share his bed was therefore more than physical intimacy. It was a sacred act, a connection to divinity itself. As his favorite, you were elevated by proximity to the divine. Priests might bless you. Artists would depict your likeness in hidden frescoes, and poets whispered verses about your beauty. Yet this sacred role was also a burden. If Pharaoh represented cosmic order, Mat, then your own behavior reflected upon him. Any misstep, arrogance, disloyalty, or even illness could be seen as a sign of imbalance, a threat to Egypt's divine harmony. Your life was not only yours to live, it was bound to the eternal order of the kingdom. Religion further shaped your daily existence. The harem was filled with shrines where women prayed to Hathor, goddess of love, and Isis, goddess of magic and motherhood. As the favorite, you were expected to make offerings, to embody fertility and grace, and to participate in rituals that reinforced Pharaoh's divine power. Sometimes, festivals required you to appear in ceremonial dress, your presence a symbol of Egypt's prosperity. But behind the gold and incense, there was another reality. These rituals were also tests of loyalty. Priests observed your conduct, noting whether your devotion seemed genuine. Rivals might whisper that you favored one god too much, or that your prayers concealed ambition. Religion, like politics, became another battlefield where your survival hinged on performance and perception. The private relationship between Pharaoh and his favorite concubine was cloaked in mystery, but hints survive in records, poetry, and art. You might have been summoned to his private chambers after a feast, when wine and music had softened his mood. In those moments, you were expected not only to please, but to enchant, to make the ruler of Egypt feel both divine and human. Some favorites were celebrated for their wit as much as their beauty, able to keep Pharaoh engaged with conversation, stories, or songs. Others relied on silence, letting mystery itself become a tool of allure. Whatever the method, intimacy was never simple affection. It was strategy, a daily negotiation between love, power, and survival. One misplaced word could cost you more than affection. It could cost your life. It is tempting to imagine the favorite as a solitary figure of privilege, but in truth, her survival depended on networks of support. Attendants, servants, and eunuchs became your lifeline. They dressed you, carried your letters, delivered your gifts, and guarded your secrets. Their loyalty was purchased with coin, jewelry, or promises of favor. But loyalty could shift, and betrayal was never far away. Many concubines learned to rotate their favors, rewarding different servants at different times to ensure no one felt overlooked. In this way, the favorite concubine became a manager as much as a lover, navigating the politics of those beneath her as carefully as those above. One disloyal attendant could undo years of careful balance, spreading whispers that reached Pharaoh's ears before you had the chance to defend yourself. Among the most dangerous challenges was motherhood. If you bore Pharaoh a child, your position changed instantly. A son could make you powerful beyond measure. For even if he never inherited the throne, His status as Pharaoh's child placed him high within the royal hierarchy. But motherhood was a double-edged sword. Queens saw concubines' children as threats to their own offspring's claims. Rival concubines envied the attention pregnancy brought, and should the child die in infancy, a common tragedy in the ancient world, whispers of curses, divine disfavor, or negligence could turn your blessing into a curse. Protecting a royal child was a task that demanded not just maternal love, but ruthless political calculation. The survival of your child, like your own survival, depended on constant vigilance. History remembers some concubines precisely because of the sons they bore. The great royal wives, Pharaoh's queens, often traced their status through their children. Yet concubines sometimes produced heirs who rose to prominence. Records suggest that certain pharaohs, such as Ramses II, fathered dozens of children through concubines, and these offspring filled positions in temples, armies, and provincial offices. For you, as the favorite, your child's success could secure your legacy long after your beauty faded, but it also painted a target on your back. Every rival with ambitions for her own child's rise watched you with sharpened envy, waiting for the moment to strike with rumor, poison, or manipulation. Even beyond politics and motherhood, survival in the harem demanded constant adaptability. The tastes of Pharaoh might shift with the seasons. One day he preferred music and laughter, the next day quiet and solemn devotion. You had to sense these changes before he himself realized them, adjusting your behavior to suit his mood. Some concubines trained in multiple arts, music, poetry, dance, and even philosophy, so that they could remain indispensable. Others specialized in mystery, carefully revealing only fragments of themselves to keep Pharaoh curious. Whatever the strategy, the truth was simple. To remain the favorite, you could never remain the same. Reinvention was your armor, and failure to adapt meant inevitable replacement. But what happened when your time as the favorite ended? Few concubines died in the height of their influence. More often, they faded into the shadows, replaced by new beauties or discarded as political winds shifted. Some were given comfortable estates, living out their days in quiet wealth, their names forgotten by history. Others were banished from the palace, stripped of privileges, and left vulnerable to the same rivals they once ruled over. And in the darkest cases, some simply disappeared, erased from records, their fates unknown. The fragility of the role meant that survival was rarely about triumph. It was about endurance. To live long enough to secure your child's future, to protect your attendants, and to leave the palace intact was a victory in itself. And so, to be Pharaoh's favorite concubine was to live at the intersection of heaven and danger. You were adored as a goddess, yet vulnerable as prey. You walked marble floors with gold at your ankles, yet every step echoed with the risk of betrayal. The palace, with its painted walls and perfumed gardens, was both your throne and your prison. History remembers pharaohs for their monuments and wars. But behind them were women like you, shaping decisions, soothing tempers, and surviving in silence. Without your influence, Egypt's history might look very different. Yet your name, like so many concubines, is lost. That is the paradox. You were essential to Pharaoh's world, yet history allowed you to vanish into its shadows. To truly grasp what it was like to be the Pharaoh's favorite concubine, you must look beyond the palace walls and understand the society watching from outside. Ordinary Egyptians knew little of the harem's inner life, yet they imagined it as a place of limitless pleasure. In truth, their perception was shaped by awe and fear. Pharaoh was divine, and those closest to him shared in his sacred aura. A favorite concubine, if glimpsed during a festival or depicted in an artwork, became larger than life in the minds of the people. She represented abundance, fertility, and luxury, the embodiment of a life beyond ordinary reach. But this admiration came with suspicion. The harem was often seen as a realm of decadence, and rumors of excess or corruption circulated among the populace. To be the favorite was not only to be envied, it was to be judged as a symbol of Pharaoh's own morality. This public perception made your position even more precarious. If the people believed Pharaoh's household was indulging too much, their discontent could spill into rebellion. Bread riots, labor strikes, and temple disputes often began with whispers that Pharaoh had lost touch with his people, and who bore the brunt of that suspicion? His inner circle, the favorites, the advisors, and the women who shared his private chambers. Thus, while you lived in luxury, your survival was tied to Egypt's stability. If the Nile failed to flood and famine spread, priests might accuse Pharaoh of angering the gods, and your influence would be seen as part of the imbalance. You were never separate from Egypt's fate. Your role was entwined with the prosperity of millions, and failure in the land could spell danger for those closest to the throne. Inside the harem, luxury and survival were marked by rituals of beauty that demanded endless dedication. Ancient texts and tomb illustrations show the importance of cosmetics in daily life. As the favorite, your face and body became canvases of power. Kohl was drawn around your eyes, not only for beauty but also to ward off infections and glare from the desert sun. Red ochre painted your lips, while malachite provided shades of green for your eyelids. Perfumes were crafted from rare resins, oils, and flowers. A single vial worth more than a farmer's yearly harvest. These rituals of beautification were not optional. They were performances of divinity, designed to project health, fertility, and divine favor. Yet beneath the painted surface, your body was mortal, subject to fatigue, illness, and age. Vulnerabilities you could never show. Age itself was the silent enemy in the harem. While pharaohs often reigned for decades, concubines rarely held favor for long. Youth was the currency that sustained your place, and time eroded it relentlessly. Many concubines turned to charms, prayers, and even secret recipes to preserve their beauty. Honey and milk baths were common, said to keep the skin youthful. Henna dyed the hair, disguising the gray of advancing years. Some experimented with dangerous concoctions, applying lead-based cosmetics that poisoned slowly even as they created a flawless finish. The irony was sharp. In seeking eternal beauty, some concubines hastened their own decline. You lived in a world where survival demanded perfection, yet perfection itself could kill. But while beauty was fleeting, knowledge could endure. The favorite concubine often became a patron of the arts, music, and even religious texts. By sponsoring scribes or musicians, you created a circle of loyalty that extended beyond your beauty. Records from the New Kingdom suggest that some concubines were educated, learning to read hieroglyphs or command servants with authority that rivaled queens. Such knowledge made you valuable, not just to Pharaoh but to the bureaucracy of the palace. A concubine who could interpret omens, recite hymns, or oversee estates became harder to replace. In this way, intellect and skill became weapons against the inevitability of time. Beauty opened the door, but wisdom could help you remain inside it longer. Still, wisdom alone could not shield you from the rivalries that defined the harem. Alliances shifted daily, and no bond was permanent. One day, another woman might gift you jewels in friendship. The next, she whispered rumors to Pharaoh's officials. This constant tension turned the harem into a crucible of paranoia. Some concubines withdrew into solitude, trusting no one. Others built elaborate networks of spies and informants within the palace walls. You, as the favorite, could not afford isolation, nor could you trust too deeply. Every relationship was a negotiation, every act of kindness a calculation. The art of survival was not about eliminating enemies, but about balancing them, ensuring that no single rival ever grew strong enough to topple you. And then there were the queens. Unlike concubines, queens held legal recognition, often married to Pharaoh in grand ceremonies that linked them to the gods. For you, as the favorite, the queen was both ally and threat. Some queens tolerated the existence of favorites, understanding that Pharaoh's heart and body were divided by necessity. Others despised concubines, seeing them as intruders who diluted their own authority. Conflict between queens and favorites could be subtle. Sharp glances at ceremonies, veiled comments in the presence of priests, or it could be open, erupting into accusations that reached Pharaoh himself. In rare cases, queens plotted directly against rivals, ensuring their downfall through orchestrated rumors or quiet assassinations. To survive, you had to navigate this most delicate rivalry of all, respecting the queen's authority while never ceding your influence entirely. This tension between queens and concubines reveals a deeper truth about Egyptian power. Women within the palace, though often hidden from public view, wielded immense influence. Their voices could shape Pharaoh's decisions. Their alliances could sway the priesthood, and their rivalries could determine the rise or fall of entire families. As the favorite concubine, you were not merely a figure of pleasure. You were a player in Egypt's endless game of power, a game fought not on battlefields but in whispers, glances, and silken chambers. Your success or failure echoed far beyond your own life. It shaped the destiny of Egypt itself, leaving imprints and decisions that historians still trace thousands of years later. Yet history rarely remembers your name. The monuments bear Pharaoh's glory, the temples proclaim the gods, and the queens leave their marks in stone inscriptions. But the favorite concubine remains a shadow, her story surviving only in fragments. A mention in a scribe's account, a depiction on a tomb wall, a rumor preserved in later tales. This anonymity was both your shield and your prison. Forgotten by history, you could vanish without consequence. But forgotten also meant erased, denied the immortality that Pharaoh and his queens claimed through stone and story. You lived at the height of luxury, but in the end, your legacy was as fragile as the painted coal on your eyelids. And so, as the torches burned low in the harem halls, and the night sounds of the palace faded into silence, you lay awake, wondering what tomorrow might bring. Would Pharaoh's eyes still seek yours, or would they wander to another? Would your servants remain loyal, or betray you for a rival's gift? Would your beauty hold, or would age begin to reveal its marks? To be Pharaoh's favorite concubine was to live in constant suspense, every day a test, every night a question. You ruled for a moment in time, suspended between divinity and danger, knowing that your story might one day vanish like incense smoke in the desert air. To understand the depth of the favorite concubine's existence, you must also consider the palace economy that surrounded her. The wealth of Egypt, drawn from conquests, trade, and the Nile's bounty, flowed into the royal court. As the favorite, you were a direct recipient of this abundance. Chests of jewelry, bolts of linen, jars of perfumed oil, and delicacies from across the empire filled your chambers. Gifts from foreign dignitaries often came directly to you. Exotic animals, spices, and rare stones meant to impress Pharaoh could just as easily adorn his beloved concubine. Yet these riches were never truly yours. They were tokens of Pharaoh's favor, symbols of your place in his heart and hierarchy. At any moment, if his affection shifted, these treasures could be stripped away, redistributed to another, leaving you with nothing but memories of splendor that once defined your life. The servants who attended you were also part of this intricate system. Dozens of hands ensured your comfort. Women who brushed your hair, bathed you in scented oils, and arranged your jewelry with meticulous care. Male scribes might record your gifts, your expenditures, even your words. Guards stood watch outside, ensuring no unauthorized visitors entered your quarters. Eunuchs moved silently through the corridors, their loyalty sworn to Pharaoh, not to you. This constant attention meant you were never truly alone. Every sigh, every tear, every glance was witnessed, catalogued, and possibly reported. Privacy was a luxury you did not own, and so your life became a performance not just for Pharaoh, but for the unseen eyes of those who served him. The politics of foreign relations also reached your chambers. Concubines were not always Egyptian. Pharaohs often accepted women from allied or conquered nations, gifts of diplomacy meant to cement treaties or demonstrate submission. To be chosen as the favorite among such a diverse circle was both a triumph and a danger. Foreign-born concubines brought their own customs, languages, and sometimes even spies. Some acted as conduits for their homeland's interests, subtly shaping Pharaoh's views or whispering requests for leniency toward their people. If you were Egyptian-born, this influx of rivals meant constant competition. If you were foreign-born, it meant balancing loyalty to your homeland with survival in Pharaoh's court. In both cases, the favorite concubine stood at the crossroads of international politics, her role extending far beyond the silken sheets of the harem. At times, the favorite became a scapegoat for larger conflicts. If Pharaoh's wars failed, if the Nile's floodwaters were too low, or if famine struck the land, whispers arose. Perhaps the gods were displeased. Perhaps Pharaoh was distracted by women. Perhaps the favorite concubine had wielded too much influence, diverting Pharaoh's attention from his duties. These accusations were not new. They appeared throughout Egypt's long history, often echoing in the downfall of dynasties. As the favorite, you bore the weight of Egypt's fortunes. Your smiles and silences could be interpreted as omens, your actions seen as blessings or curses. You were both elevated as divine and condemned as dangerous, a paradox that defined your existence. To survive, you learned to embody both roles without ever leaning too far into either. The rituals of night revealed the contradictions most clearly. After feasts in gilded halls, Pharaoh might summon you to his private chambers. Musicians played softly, dancers entertained, and perfumed lamps filled the room with intoxicating scents. When you entered, silence often fell. All eyes turned to you, the woman who had captured Pharaoh's favor above all others. In that moment, you were untouchable, your beauty and charm the focus of the empire's ruler. Yet the same night could end with whispers from rivals, gifts exchanged in secret, or even subtle plots to undermine your place. The intimacy you shared with Pharaoh became the most guarded and dangerous secret of all, for those who envied you would stop at nothing to claim it for themselves. The dangers of replacement lingered over every encounter. Pharaoh's gaze might wander during festivals, his attention caught by a new dancer, singer, or foreign bride. You could feel the shift in his tone, the length of his visits, the warmth of his words. And when that shift came, you had little defense. Unlike queens, whose marriages were secured by contracts and divine rituals, concubines held their position by affection alone. When affection cooled, so did your influence. Some concubines clung desperately, showering Pharaoh with gifts or appeals. Others withdrew gracefully, hoping to preserve dignity and avoid punishment. But for the favorite, the fall was always steep. One day, you held Egypt's ear. The next, you were forgotten in the shadows of the palace. Survival required not only rising to favor, but learning how to descend without destruction. And yet, even in decline, some favorites carved out legacies. Estates granted during their peak allowed them to live comfortably, sometimes even as patrons of temples or guardians of Pharaoh's children. Others became figures of quiet power, advising younger concubines or serving as intermediaries between the harem and officials. In rare cases, a concubine's son rose high enough to secure her a permanent place within the royal family. These stories, though fewer, show that survival was possible, if you played the game with caution, humility, and foresight. The favorite concubine who endured beyond Pharaoh's affection was not merely beautiful. She was cunning, adaptable, and endlessly watchful. Yet the greatest irony of all lies in history's silence. Pharaohs built monuments to themselves. Queens left inscriptions that preserved their names. Priests recorded their rituals in stone. But the concubines, even the favorites, rarely appear in the record. They were shadows, existing in whispers and fragments, a painting on a tomb wall, a fleeting mention in a court document, a rumor carried into foreign lands. These are the traces that survive. The women who shaped Pharaoh's moods, who whispered into his ear during Egypt's greatest triumphs and darkest crises, are invisible in the grand narrative of history. Their absence is not proof of insignificance, but of deliberate erasure. Power lived in their presence, but history denied them permanence. As the fires dimmed in the palace courtyards and priests chanted prayers to the gods, you remained in your chambers, weighed down by silks and secrets. The empire outside flourished or faltered. Its people prayed and labored. Its temples rose toward the heavens. And in the heart of it all, you, the favorite concubine, lived on a knife's edge, balancing desire, influence, and fear. To the world, you were the epitome of beauty and grace, the woman who captured the divine Pharaoh's heart. But to yourself, you were a survivor in a gilded prison, a player in a game that allowed no mistakes. Tomorrow might bring another feast, another ritual, another chance to hold Pharaoh's gaze, or it might bring silence, dismissal, and disappearance. That was the truth of your life, adored, envied, feared, yet always uncertain, forever walking between splendor and oblivion. The mythology surrounding Pharaoh's harem deepened the mystique of the favorite concubine. Tales whispered in marketplaces often exaggerated the pleasures of palace life, but behind these stories lay fragments of truth. Egyptian mythology blurred the line between gods and rulers, and by extension, their companions. Some believed that the favorite concubine carried the blessing of Hathor herself, goddess of love and joy, while others saw her as a potential vessel of chaos. If her influence led Pharaoh astray, such ideas were not harmless gossip. They could shape how priests, advisors, and even Pharaoh himself perceived your presence. When temples claimed that divine displeasure explained failed harvests, fingers often pointed toward the harem. Thus, your survival required careful alignment with religion. A concubine who participated visibly in rituals, who honored the gods, who gave offerings, could guard herself against accusations that she was the source of Egypt's misfortunes. Rituals in the harem were both sacred and strategic. Priests might summon you to attend festivals dedicated to Hathor or Isis, requiring you to dance, sing, or make symbolic offerings. In these moments, your presence was more than performance. It was propaganda. You embodied fertility, loyalty, and divine harmony, reinforcing Pharaoh's role as the guarantor of order. Yet such public appearances exposed you to scrutiny. Priests examined your movements, courtiers noted your demeanor, and rivals looked for any sign of arrogance or weakness. A stumble in dance, a poorly chosen word, even a glance interpreted as disrespect could ignite whispers that reached Pharaoh. For this reason, every ritual became a trial, every gesture calculated. You learned to smile just enough to charm, bow just enough to respect, and remain silent when silence was safer than speech. But for all the scrutiny, there were also moments of intimacy and power. Pharaoh's favorite concubine was often invited into councils and discussions that extended beyond affection. If he trusted you, your words could shape decisions. You might suggest a temple to honor a god, recommend a loyal servant for promotion, or caution against a treacherous courtier. These whispers, spoken in private chambers, could ripple outward to affect armies, taxes, and foreign policy. Of course, such influence was precarious. Pharaoh might heed your advice one day and dismiss it the next, particularly if rivals painted your counsel as Nevertheless, those who mastered subtlety often left an invisible handprint on Egypt's history, shaping outcomes while leaving no record of their involvement. The greatest threat to the favorite's survival came from within the harem itself. Rivalries were unrelenting, sharpened by the knowledge that only one woman could stand at Pharaoh's side most prominently. Jealousy simmered in daily routines. A rival concubine might bribe servants to sabotage your cosmetics, poison your food, or intercept your messages. Others used subtler tactics, planting rumors of arrogance or infidelity, Poisonings were not unheard of, though harder to prove. Sudden illnesses that struck concubines often went uninvestigated, dismissed as the will of the gods. This constant danger required vigilance. Many favorites employed personal tasters or rotated servants frequently, ensuring no one had too much access. Trust was a rare luxury. Your survival depended not on faith but on suspicion, for in the harem, affection was fleeting, but envy was eternal. Physical survival was only one aspect. Emotional survival was another. Imagine living each day knowing your worth depended on beauty, charm, and Pharaoh's shifting affections. You could not relax, for complacency meant decline. Anxiety lurked in every silence, every late summons, every glance Pharaoh gave another woman. Some concubines turned to spiritual comfort, praying daily to Hathor, or wearing protective amulets. Others drowned in luxury, seeking distraction in wine, music, or the company of servants. Yet even these comforts were hollow, for the harem was a cage, no matter how gilded. You could not leave without permission, could not walk among the people freely, could not truly choose your fate. Your survival depended on a man's desire and a court's tolerance. It was a life of extremes, adored and imprisoned, envied and isolated, powerful and powerless all at once. Occasionally, a favorite concubine's influence reached legendary proportions. Ancient texts hint at women whose charm captivated Pharaoh so completely that they reshaped history. One tale recalls how a concubine persuaded Pharaoh to build a temple in her honor, only for it to be rededicated after her fall from grace. Another whispers of a favorite who swayed military campaigns, urging Pharaoh to spare or destroy enemies according to her hidden loyalties. Whether true or exaggerated, these stories reflect the perception that concubines could wield immense, though unofficial, authority. But with such legends came suspicion. To be remembered as too influential risked being vilified. Pharaoh's officials, jealous of lost power, often painted favorites as manipulative temptresses, corrupting the king and weakening Egypt. Thus, the same qualities that gave you power, beauty, wit, persuasion, could also destroy your reputation, ensuring that history condemned you even if you survived. Yet survival sometimes meant fading gracefully. When youth diminished and Pharaoh's attention shifted, some concubines retired quietly, granted estates or villas along the Nile. There they lived out their days in relative peace, tending gardens, raising children, and funding temples. These women rarely entered the historical record. Their names lost, but their lives likely more tranquil than those who clung desperately to favor. For them, survival was not about eternal power, but about securing safety beyond the palace walls. They illustrate a paradox. Sometimes, surrender was the ultimate form of victory. By leaving the stage before rivals or officials orchestrated your downfall, you preserved your dignity and perhaps even your life. In contrast, those who resisted their decline often met harsher ends, their stories swallowed by silence or scandal. And through all of this, the favorite concubine remained a figure caught between myth and reality. To the world outside, she was the woman who enchanted a god-king, living in unimaginable luxury. To herself, she was a survivor, trapped in a system where affection was currency and danger was constant. Every smile concealed calculation, every embrace masked strategy, every gift reminded her of the fragility of favor. Her life was a testament to resilience, but also to the cruelty of power structures that offered grandeur at the cost of freedom. Pharaoh's monuments still rise above the desert, his name carved in stone for eternity. The favorite concubine, however, remains faceless, her story scattered in whispers. Her survival was real, her struggles immense, her influence undeniable, yet history chose silence, leaving us only fragments to imagine the life of the woman closest to Egypt's living god, while much of the favorite concubine's life is cloaked in silence. Certain glimpses survive through archaeology, inscriptions, and foreign accounts. These fragments reveal that the favorite was not merely a shadow, but sometimes a pivotal figure in Egypt's political and cultural history. Consider the New Kingdom, when pharaohs like Amenhotep III and Ramses II presided over vast empires. Their harems were filled with dozens, if not hundreds of women, yet records suggest that a select few rose above the rest. Amenhotep III's reign, in particular, provides tantalizing hints. While his queen, Tai, is well documented, lesser inscriptions refer to women of foreign birth who held unusual favor. Some came from Mitanni, Babylon, or Nubia, sent as diplomatic gifts to cement alliances. These women did not remain nameless companions. Their very presence represented the balance of power between empires. To be the favorite among them was to embody not just desire, but also international politics. One striking example is the so-called Harem conspiracy during the reign of Ramses III. Though later in history, it reveals how the influence of royal women could reshape dynasties. A lesser wife, Tai, allegedly orchestrated a plot to assassinate Ramses so her son could ascend the throne. The conspiracy failed, but it underscores a truth. The harem was not merely a place of pleasure, it was a political arena, and favorites were players whose survival or downfall could determine Egypt's future. Imagine being the favorite in such a context. Each gesture scrutinized, each word capable of fueling rumors of treachery. The conspiracy reminds us that even the most private spaces of Pharaoh's life were entangled in the fate of the state, and concubines stood at the heart of this volatile intersection. Foreign-born favorites deserve particular attention. Diplomatic marriages and gifts of concubines were central to Egyptian foreign policy. Letters preserved in the Amarna archives show pharaohs negotiating for daughters of foreign kings, debating dowries, and exchanging lavish presents. When such women entered Egypt, they brought with them the weight of their nations. If one rose to become Pharaoh's favorite, she became a living link between empires. Her words might soften Pharaoh's stance in war or strengthen his loyalty in peace. Yet her position was doubly precarious. She was often viewed with suspicion by Egyptian-born rivals, accused of harboring divided loyalties. Priests sometimes questioned her devotion to Egyptian gods, while officials doubted her allegiance. For her, survival meant not only pleasing Pharaoh, but also proving her loyalty to a nation that might forever view her as an outsider. The fate of these foreign favorites varied widely. Some vanished without trace, likely sidelined when political winds shifted. Others appear in inscriptions, their names recorded as mothers of royal children or patrons of temples. In rare cases, their offspring became heirs, intertwining foreign bloodlines with Egypt's divine kingship. But even in these triumphs, danger lurked. A favorite whose son was seen as a rival to the heir of the great royal wife could easily become the target of intrigue. History reminds us that queens were not powerless, and rivals within the harem could unite to eliminate threats. The favorite concubine's role was thus deeply unstable. One day an embodiment of unity between nations, the next a liability to be erased. Archaeology also offers insight into the daily lives of these women. Excavations at Malkata Amenhotep III's palace complex revealed decorated chambers, intricate cosmetics jars, and fine clothing once worn by women of the harem. These artifacts, though silent, speak volumes. They show how favorites adorned themselves not only for beauty but as extensions of power. Perfumed oils from Punt, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar from Lebanon. Each item reflected the reach of Egypt's empire and the resources funneled into the lives of Pharaoh's companions. To hold such treasures was to live at the pinnacle of luxury, but also at the mercy of Pharaoh's continued favor. Every artifact was both a gift and a reminder of dependence. Even literature hints at the status of favorites. Egyptian love poetry, preserved on papyri, describes women whose beauty captivated men like the rising sun or the blossoming lotus. While not explicitly about concubines, these verses reflect the ideals projected onto favorites: divine beauty, intoxicating allure, and the power to heal sorrow with a glance. Yet beneath the poetry lies tension. Desire was celebrated, but it was also feared. Women who inspired too much passion could be seen as dangerous, their charm likened to spells or enchantments. To be Pharaoh's favorite concubine was to embody this paradox, adored as the ideal of beauty, distrusted as a potential source of chaos. Every love poem that praised such a woman also hinted at the shadows cast by her power. Religious depictions further reinforced this duality. Some favorites appear alongside Pharaoh in temple reliefs, their images preserved in stone. Their roles in rituals, often linked to fertility and abundance, tied them symbolically to Egypt's prosperity. Yet, just as often, their names were omitted, their faces generic, their identities erased. This erasure was intentional. By keeping concubines anonymous, the record emphasized Pharaoh's divinity, while reducing his companions to interchangeable symbols. For you, as the favorite, this anonymity was both insult and protection. It denied you immortality in the historical record, but it also shielded you from the scrutiny that queens endured. You existed in the liminal space between presence and absence, remembered in whispers, but rarely in stone. And still, despite the scarcity of records, the echoes of favorites endure. Foreign kings wrote of sending daughters to Pharaoh, boasting of their alliances. Egyptian officials recorded the expenditures of the harem, detailing food, fabrics, and perfumes that sustained its women. Priests muttered suspicions about Pharaoh's distractions, hinting at the sway of concubines in his private chambers. Through these fragments, we reconstruct a picture of survival, a life at once enviable and perilous. The favorite concubine was not a passive figure of pleasure. She was a nexus of beauty, politics, and power, balancing the weight of Egypt's destiny in her fragile hands. As night deepened in the palace and torches flickered along the colonnades, your world remained suspended between myth and reality. You were adored yet mistrusted, envied yet isolated, powerful yet disposable. To hold Pharaoh's gaze was to grasp eternity for a moment, but to keep it was a struggle against rivals, politics, and time itself. The favorite concubine lived not as a woman of leisure, but as a survivor in an empire where love and danger were indistinguishable. And with each dawn, you faced the same question. Would this day secure your immortality, or hasten your disappearance into the silence of history? The final truth of the favorite concubine lies in her absence from the grand monuments of history. Pharaohs carved their victories into stone. Queens secured their names in temples. Priests preserved their rituals on papyri. Yet the favorite, for all her influence, often vanished into silence. This was deliberate. Her role was intimate, powerful, but ultimately temporary. The state ensured her erasure, preserving Pharaoh's divinity untainted by mortal passion. But the irony is sharp. Though her name was erased, her influence lived on in the decisions Pharaoh made, the alliances he honored, the children who carried fragments of her lineage. She was invisible in stone, yet unforgettable in effect. A paradox that defined so many women of Egypt's court, present in the heart of power, absent in the memory of time. Survival for her was not immortality in record, but the fleeting mark she left on Pharaoh's soul. Her survival strategy was, in many ways, timeless. To remain Pharaoh's favorite, she mastered adaptability. She knew when to be silent and when to speak, when to dazzle with beauty and when to retreat into humility. She learned to navigate envy within the harem, suspicion among officials, and the fickleness of Pharaoh himself. She perfected the art of invisibility when danger loomed, only to re-emerge in moments when her presence mattered most. These strategies echo across cultures and centuries, for the survival of women in patriarchal courts has always demanded brilliance, masked as simplicity, strength hidden beneath grace. In the favorite concubine of Egypt, we glimpse a universal figure, the woman who endures by bending without breaking, who thrives in a world built to confine her. And yet, her life was not without contradictions. She was worshipped in whispers as Hathor incarnate, yet dismissed as a distraction when Pharaoh faltered. She was adorned in gold and gems, yet forbidden the freedom of the markets beyond the palace walls. She was the closest companion to the living god, yet she could be cast aside overnight, replaced as easily as an ornament. These contradictions defined her existence and ensured her invisibility in the historical record. But they also make her a mirror of human resilience. For beneath the layers of myth and politics, she was still a woman, vulnerable, cunning, hopeful, and fearful. To imagine her life is to recognize the tension between grandeur and fragility that marked the very heart of Egypt's royal court. Legends and myths eventually filled the silence history imposed. Later, storytellers in Greece and Rome spoke of Egypt's exotic harems, exaggerating their decadence, transforming concubines into symbols of luxury and corruption. These tales, though distant from the truth, ensured that the image of Pharaoh's favorite never disappeared entirely. Even if nameless, she endured in imagination. And in many ways, this myth-making reflects the same fascination that persists today. We wonder what it was like, how she survived, how she balanced beauty and danger. The mystery of her absence makes her presence stronger. In every tomb, painting of women with musical instruments, in every perfume jar uncovered in palace ruins, in every foreign king's letter boasting of daughters sent to Pharaoh, we sense her shadow, the favorite who once walked those corridors, unseen yet unforgettable. Her legacy also lives in the questions she raises about power itself. What does it mean to be loved by a god-king? What does it cost to hold influence without recognition? And what does survival look like in a system designed to erase you? The favorite concubine forces us to confront these questions, to see how power and vulnerability coexist, how splendor can mask fragility, how even in the most glorious of civilizations, the most intimate figures remain silenced. She embodies the reality that history is not only about kings and conquests, but also about the women who moved unseen through the palaces, shaping destinies with whispers and glances. Their absence in records is not absence of significance. It is proof of how history chooses what to remember and what to forget. And so, as we close this exploration, you are left standing in the quiet halls of a palace long turned to dust. The columns rise around you, their carvings praising Pharaoh's victories, their hieroglyphs immortalizing gods and queens. But in the shadows between these walls, you sense another presence, the favorite concubine, whose laughter once echoed, whose perfume once lingered, whose influence once turned the tide of empires. You cannot see her name, but you can feel her survival in the silence, in the secrets, in the fragments. She remains both everywhere and nowhere, her story lost yet alive, her fate uncertain yet eternal. That is the legacy of Pharaoh's favorite concubine, a woman who lived in splendor and peril, remembered not in stone but in the mystery that will forever surround her.